we will be doing is we'll be talking about agents, its components, and then we'll talk about how to build agents using FloTorch. And then we will also do a live demo where I will walk through later via Collab Notebook on how to build these agents and how is it so easy using FloTorch, right? So we'll talk about that. But before going into that part, I'll just give a very quick recap of the previous session that we have done, right? So let me show that, right? So basically, this is what the part one actually talks about, right? So the part one here was given by my colleague Hemant, right? So he talked about building GenAI applications using FloTorch. He went through multiple stages of GenAI development, how much percent will actually go into the exploratory part, what percentage goes into POC part, what percentage goes into production, and then also the workflow integration part, right? So what kind of projects actually get into that, right? So he talked about all of those things, and then moving forward, what were the challenges, right? So when we talk about challenges, it's about individual challenges, right? So role-based challenges in that case, right? So what does it mean? It simply means that, okay, let's say there is a GenAI engineer. What are the challenges that he or she will face when they want to build these kinds of applications, right? So do they need a low code or a no code platform, or do they have to select some sort of a platform for building these kinds of applications, or some framework? What kind of LLM to be used? All of these things. Apart from that, technical managers have a different types of challenges, right? So how do we do the evaluation of the whole application that is built? How can I have the security guidelines, right? Let's say CTOs have different kinds of challenges. Let's say what should be the guardrails so that my application is not misused, right? Again, when we go to the CIO, again, there is on a multiple applications level, they will have a different challenge, right? So how do I track the usage? What is the cost that I'm actually putting in for each and every project? What is the usage of all of these projects in together, right? So these kinds of challenges, right? So the solution that he pointed to was the FloTorch, right? So he talked about how FloTorch can be used to build these applications where you can use this drag and drop feature for professionals. Let's say you have SDKs that you can integrate. For experts, you have to simply point your applications towards the FloTorch gateway for your traceability, observability, and things like that, right? And then we also talked about the model calls that can be done, right? So there was a comparison that was done between, let's say, a traditional application, or let's say a traditional approach and a FloTorch approach, and how easy it is to set up a model, which we call it as a FloTorch model, and then use, right? So, and also we saw how LLMs are supported, right? So what are the different types of LLMs are supported, which come in FloTorch console, right? So this was some things that he talked about, and finally he moved to something called as key benefits and advantages, right? So very, very important point, right? So what were the important features that were actually given? Right, so the features were basically you could do caching, which can save you a lot of time. If there are repeated questions that are coming, you don't have to call your LLM again and use those tokens, right? So it saves time, it saves a lot of tokens for you, right? So routing was something which was offered, right? So apart from that, there was observability and tracing for all your applications, which he showed in multiple slides, right? So you can actually find all of those slides, which we will be posting anyway, right? So those are the things that were covered in the previous session. So now what we will be doing is, in today's session, we will be talking about agents, as I said earlier, right? So we'll talk about what are agents, why do we need them, right? Apart from that, building AI agents with FloTorch, how it can be done, how easy it is, right? So, and then we will move on to the demo part, as I said, right? So we'll build, or let's say I'll give a demo of 3 applications today, which will have a local tool, a very basic one, and then we will talk about a RAG agent, and then we'll also talk about how we actually have a MCP tool used for this agent, right? So those are the things that we will be talking about, right? And then there would be part 3 that is going to come, which my colleague again, Brijesh, is going to take about on how these workflows can be used in FloTorch. So he'll be talking about those things in the future session, right? So now let's move on to today's topic, right? So today's topic, I'll start with a very fundamental question, right? So what exactly is an agent and how it is different from chatbots you might already be familiar with, right? So an AI agent is more than just a chatbot that answers questions, right? It's a software program that can work toward goals autonomously. That is very important, right? So an AI agent is software program that can interact with its environment, collect data, and you use the data to perform autonomous multi-step tasks that achieve predetermined goals without constant human supervision, right? So these are all the things that you should be aware of, right? So on when we talk about agent, right? So example being, let's say a traditional AI, right? So I can ask a very simple question to a traditional AI, right? So let's say what's weather in California, or let's say what's the weather in maybe San Francisco, right? It simply gives whatever the temperature it is, and let's say it's sunny or cloudy or things like that. But when it comes to agent is a little bit more complex tasks that you can actually do, right? So let's say I can say simply like plan my business trip to California, right? So if I say that, what actually happens based on your system prompt and things like that, or the instructions that you have given, basically it looks for weather. It looks for, let's say, flights which are there from your present location to California, and then probably it books. Then it does reservations for your hotel, creates itinerary, adds to the calendar, and also sends the confirmation. Right, so you can see the flow. It is basically a goal-based behavior. It can actually perform for you. Right, so those are all the things that can do. Right, so now let's look at what's single agent, right? So it can how it look like. Right? So now we can see that in the block diagram. I have few components that I have mentioned in this block diagram, right? So it can actually vary based on multiple sources that you are reading, right? So as this is a very evolving field, people come up with multiple jargon, multiple terminologies to define the components. But on a high level, you can say that this is how, on a very high level, it actually looks like, right? So it has a user interaction. Basically, you can say that this is some sort of an entry point for your goals, right? Questions and feedbacks, right? And then natural language interface for business users, right? So then there is this system prompt that you can see parallel to it, right? So it defines uh, agent's personality, right? So how it should behave, what are its capabilities, what are its constraints, right? So it acts as agent's job description to say, right? So and operating instructions for agents, how it has to, let's say, behave, right? So moving forward, you can define tools, or you will be defining tools in that case, right? So external capabilities that the agent can actually use, right? So APIs, databases, functions, right? So in FloTorch, we have function tool wrapper around Python functions, which will do that for you, right? So we'll talk about that, or we'll see that while we are running that demo part, right? You can add one more component over here, right? So this is a very basic design that I have actually put in, but you can add one more component, let's say planning and reasoning, right? So where you can simply go ahead and add, which actually does some tasks which are complex in nature, right? So let's say where the agent decides what to do next, right? So it is usually powered by an LLM, right? So guided by logics and constraints and things like that, but you can have that component as well. Apart from that, you can have, or let's say moving to the next component that you are seeing over here, which is memory, right? So this memory, it can be short term, it can be long term, right? So it's basically trying to kind of save the context, the conversational context, which is current conversational context. Long term can be learned preferences, right? So basically, if you have some historical interactions, you want to look back to that historical interactions and make decisions for now as well, right? So that's where this memory part actually comes in, right? So in FloTorch, we will be using something called as FloTorch ADK session, which handles automatically everything for you on the memory part as well, right? So apart from that, we have these LLMs, right? So what are these LLMs? So this is basically a brain, right, for your all the processes that you want to run, right? So it's basically trying to give you, or let's say help you make decisions. In FloTorch, basically you have a lot of or let's say multiple models that you can access through unified gateway, right? And then you have something called as a goal as well that you can see below, right? So this is the target outcome that the agent is working toward, right? So it is actually basically you're trying to tell something that, okay, I want to achieve this. In that case, what happens is this becomes the goal, right? So it can be explicit, let's say I want to book a meeting, or it can be even implicit. You can simply say that, okay, help the user to do that, to do this, and the agent will actually make those decisions for you, right? So these are this is the basic structure of an agent, right? So now what makes agents special are these four characteristics that you see on your screen, right? So basically I'll go one by one, a little bit quicker over here. um, First one is autonomy, right? So autonomy simply means that it can operate independently for extended periods without human intervention, right? So that's something very important, right? So let's say I have given a goal, and agent keeps on working towards achieving that goal, right? So in our FloTorch demo, we will see that how actually we can actually perform a Google search through an agent. Probably if there is a requirement of querying documents, it will do. If it is not required, it will not do, right? So that's the application that we will be going through, right? Next is goal-oriented behavior, right? So like I said earlier, it's basically it plans and executes multi-step strategies to achieve specific objectives for you, right? So instead of just answering what's the weather, like what I was saying, when I say plan the weekend activities, or let's say plan my business trip to some city, it will actually look for multiple things that it has to look for, right? So it will actually check the weather, flight availability, what is the best mode of transport for you, right? And then hotel booking, as I said, right? So all of these things will be done in this part, which is goal oriented behavior. Moving on to the next one, which is environmental interaction, right? So it's basically responding to the changing conditions, right? So you can't expect that environment would always remain same, and the agent has to understand the changes as well, right? So that delta it has to understand, right? So responds to changing conditions and gathers information from multiple sources, right? So it actually does that monitoring the real-time data, adapts to the new information, and adjust accordingly, right? So that is what the environmental interaction does. Next is decision making capabilities, right? So this is also one of the important. Basically, it is something which you can think like intelligently selects appropriate tools and actions based on the context, right? So it chooses the right tool based on what your application is, right? So all of these things combined together make your agents very, very useful, or let's say very, very important at this era, right? So that was on a high level what agents are and what are its characteristics. I went a little bit in depth, but that was needed, right? So moving forward, what we will look into is we will try and understand what are the different types of agents, right? So you can see here there are at least 5 types of agents that I have mentioned. You can think there are 7 or 8. You can think because as I said, it's an evolving topic. There would be a lot of things that are getting added. So I've just restricted myself here for 5 types of different agents, right? So you can see here the first one that I mentioned is simple agents, right? So simple agents are basically very simple, as the name suggests, right? It simply runs on, let's say, if and then rules, right? So responding immediately to the current inputs without any memory of past actions or consideration of future outcomes, right? So they work really well when they are in observable or let's say predictable environments where the expected output is actually known, right? So some sort of very simple tasks it can do, right? So thermostats or things like that you can take an example of, right? So next one is you can talk about something called as utility based agents. Utility based agents are a little bit complex in nature, right? So when there is some numerical values involvement done, right? So in that case you will see that utility based agents are much more used, right? So let's say there is some sort of financial portfolio management that has to happen, right? So in these cases you can see that utility based agents will be used. Moving on, model-based reflex agents, or let's say model-based agents are available, goal-based agents are available, learning-based agents are available, right? So I have put in what these actually mean, right? So as you get into more agents, you can see that the tasks that it can actually handle will be much more complexer in nature, right? So learning agents that you can see, they are very, very adaptive in nature, right? So based on their performance through experience, feedback, and let's say machine learning techniques, it actually kinds of learns a lot in these types of learning agents, right? So this is on a high level, what are the different types of agents that are available, right? So now that we understand what agents are, the next question becomes, how do we actually build them, right? And more importantly, how do we build them for, let's say, production use at scale, right? So that becomes very, very important. So let me move on my slide to that part, right? So here, the slide talks about, let's say, which is the right framework that I have to use, right? So let me explain this, right? So when we talk about framework or an agentic AI framework, and I want you to think carefully on this, right? So is a foundational software structure that provides the tools, protocols, and infrastructure needed to build, deploy, and manage autonomous agents, right? Notice I said foundational structure, right? So not just a library or a tool, it's the entire foundation that your agents will actually run on. That's the reason it becomes very, very important for us to understand. It serves as, let's say, a kind of a blueprint that outlines how AI components such as perception models or planning algorithms or decision making processes, or let's say the tool integration actually happens, right? So this is all this is all handled by your AI frameworks, or let's say agentic AI frameworks, right? So think of it as an operating system, right? So you can simply say that, okay, kind of an operating system, just like you don't build a Windows from scratch or run a program, you don't build agents infrastructure from scratch, right? So you simply want to go ahead and use some sort of a framework which is already proven, right? So now let me walk through or show you the different types of components that I wanted to show you here, right? So on the slide that you have, right? So this diagram that you can see, we have multiple levels, or let's say in that stack, right? So there is something called as vertical agents, right? So vertical agents is basically kind of agents which are more specialists in nature, right? So they are kind of trained on some specific tasks, and that's what these vertical agents are, right? Then there is agent hosting and serving platforms, right? So let's say LangGraph or Amazon Bedrock for deployment that people usually use, right? So then there is something called as observability, right? So it's basically trying to monitor what is actually happening, how many calls have been done, how agent is performing, right? So where is the spike, and all of that, right? So that actually has, let's say, Langsmith and things like that. FloTorch is one of the important flow feature in FloTorch is, let's say, it gives you observability and it also gives you traceability, right? So yeah, so next part is agentic, or let's say agent frameworks in, right? So the core building block, right? So we can talk about Creo AI, you can talk about Autogen. There are so many agent frameworks that are available that you can simply go ahead and use, right? So we'll be using one of such, which is Google ADK framework for our application. Moving forward, so there is something also called as memory systems, like we mentioned above in our previous slides, right? So it's basically a persistent memory you want to have for having that context to run things, right? Apart from that, there are tool libraries which are pre-built, sandboxes, model serving platforms to access LLMs, right? So you want to, let's say, access something like Gemini, or you might want to access something like a Sonnet, which is in Claude, right? So these are all your model serving platforms, right? Apart from that, one very important thing that I also want to touch upon is basically the storage part, right? So you might need databases, you might need vector stores to store your data, and maybe your let's say agent has to interact with that storage as well, right? So that's all about these frameworks and multiple tools where you can go ahead and use, right? So like, it's like, imagine trying to build a production agent by manually integrating tools from each of this, right? So you can see that selection, or let's say trying to evaluate each and every tool, becomes so tedious, right? So that's where you can say that, okay, FloTorch is going to help you. You can kind of combine all of these things, use the FloTorch application to select whichever the tool you want to, whichever the LLM that you want to. And as I said, it's kind of a gateway that is inbuilt. And also you have this traceability, you have this observability that you can simply go ahead and start using. Right. So a good agentic AI, let's say like ADK, which powers our Google ADK, right? So which powers that we will see in our FloTorch demonstration, integrates all these layers at stack, right? So which we are seeing here. So that's how you can go ahead and combine, or let's say use each and every component wherever it is required, right? So it's like getting a fully furnished house. You can simply think of, instead of buying land and buying each and everything from scratch, right? So that's how FloTorch is going to help you in building these kinds of ecosystems, right? So let me move my slide to the next one. So just give me a moment. Yeah, right. So before I get into the, let's say the actual code part or the demo part, what I also want to do is I also kind of want to walk you through this components stage by stage, right? So that we are all on the same page, right? So now this will actually help you understand what's happening behind the scenes when we run our agent, right? So think of this as like anatomy of agent framework, right? So these 6 components that we are going to see one by one, how these are going to behave, right? So that we are going to check. The first one, as you can see here, it's basically the agent orchestration engine, right? So, and I have given few examples that you can go ahead and use. Let's say Crew AI, LangGraph, or Google ADK, which in our case, we are going to use Google ADK, right? So this is the first thing that you can see, which we will be talking about, right? So this is the orchestration engine, right? So next, there is something called as tool integration layer, right? So basically, you can think of the orchestration engine also like it actually has decision making capability as well, right? So it simply says, should I run tasks sequentially, or let's say in parallel? Should agent A hand off to agent B? All of those things can actually be handled by your agent orchestration engine, right? So next, there is something also called as reasoning and planning modules, which I will talk about, right? But we will also talk about something called as the tool integration layer, right? So this is where agents become very, very powerful, right? So this tool integration layer, this component allows agents to actually do things in real world, right? So it's just not about talk, right? So it kind of, whether it's calling an API, or let's say executing code, searching databases, or integrating with external services, right? So this layer makes it possible in our demonstration, right? So we will look into that. We will call something called as function tools, and then we will talk about that too, right? So moving forward, we have something called as the reasoning and planning modules, right? So when we talk about, let's say, reasoning and planning modules, this is where the actual intelligence lives, right? So the LLMs that understand natural language break down complex problems and decide what to do next, right? So you can simply notice that we have multiple options again, right? So notice we have options like Amazon Bedrock, OpenAI, Anthropic, and things like that. So here's where FloTorch really shines, right? So instead of being logged into one provider, FloTorch gives you unified access to all sorts of, or let's say all the platforms or all the LLMs that you want to use using a single API, right? So we'll look into that when we get into the demo part as well, right? So the next part is communication protocols, right? So communication protocols is basically kind of handles how different parts of the system talk to each other, right? So this includes message formatting, event handling, let's say, right? So coordination between component. This might seem technical, but it's what enables agents to seamlessly hand off tasks, right? Share context and coordinate complex workflows. Google ADK provides this through the event-driven architecture, which we will be looking into, right? So let me move to the next component, which is memory, right? So as I said in the beginning as well, memory is one of the important components that we should be kind of be very careful about, right? So when we talk about memory, right, so it's a very crucial layer, as I said, for creating agents that feel truly intelligent, right? So this includes short-term memory for current conversations and long-term memory for learning from the past interactions as well, right? So both of them, which I mentioned earlier also, right? So you see solutions like Redis, or let's say for fast access, ChromaDB for vector storage, or let's say MemGPT for sophisticated memory architectures, right? So in our demo, FloTorch ADK handles automatically maintaining conversation context across multiple interactions, right? So we'll look into that too, right? Last but not the least part. So here is basically the monitoring part, right? So this monitoring and governance, right? So this becomes absolutely critical for production deployments, right? So if you're running some sort of POCs or trying to test some things, it's fine. But if you want to get into the production where you want to scale your applications and see the usage and want to have that complete transparent picture or behind the screens, this is something which is very, very needed, right? So monitoring and governance, absolutely critical, as I said, for your production system, right? It actually tracks agents performance, ensures compliance, provides debugging capabilities, right? So and manages security, right? So FloTorch includes enterprise grade monitoring out of the box, right? So you can see exactly what your agents are doing, how they are performing, and ensure they are operating within defined boundaries or not, right? So these are all the components that we should be aware about, right? So now here's the key insight, right? So notice how these components are connected in a flow, right? So they don't work in isolation, right? So when you send a request to an agent, orchestration engine receives, right? And then let's say reasoning plans and plans the approach, and then memory provides the context, and then let's say tool executes the actions, communication coordinates the process, and then monitoring happens, right? So monitoring tracks everything, right? So this happens in milliseconds, often cycling through multiple iterations until the goal is achieved, right? So it's not like I'm just moving from A to B, right? So there might be multiple steps in between to reach from A to B, and agent has to plan that accordingly and move and let's say achieve that goal which we have mentioned, right? So what we will do now is we will go through the code part, right? So I will run through three applications, as I mentioned, right? So let's build some applications. So you can see single agent with local tool, right? So we'll also check with RAG with agent, and then we'll also use a MCP, right? So your model context protocol, we will use that also, right? So we will have these three demos done going forward, right? So let me change my screen from this to, oops. Yeah, by the way, you can all sign up to the FloTorch part, guys. You can simply scan this and sign up. Probably Brijesh is giving you the steps how to do that, right? So you have 1 billion tokens free, right? So it's going to refresh and you can simply go ahead and use it, right? So I would like all of you to try and let us know how you feel about it. Right, so let me change my screen, stop sharing, and I'll reshare my screen again. So let me reshare my screen. Alishbhai, please confirm if my screen is visible.
It just is starting. Yeah, it's visible now.
Awesome. Thank you. Thanks for that confirmation. Right. So now what I'm trying to do here is, right, so this is the official URL for your FloTorch, right? So simply type flotorch.ai. That should take to this website, right? So this is the home page. And now we have made all of those code snippets, or let's say the notebooks that we are going to run public, right? So you can simply go to GitHub over here. This will actually navigate through the GitHub resources repo. So in this GitHub resources, you can go to examples. In examples, you have something called as FloTorch agent examples. So these are the three notebooks that I would want you guys to try and experience yourselves that how easy it is to build these kinds of applications and test with FloTorch, right? So now let me do one thing. I'll just open up a notebook which was already there. I'm just going to reconnect this to the Google Colab, right? So now you can see that I'll just, on a very high level, I'll walk you through the code, right? So which we have over here, right? So I'll just give you the steps so that you understand what is actually happening in this notebook, and then you can try yourself, right? So here you can see installing, right? So basically you go ahead and simply install something called as a FloTorch ADK, right? So this is a simple pip install in your Python code, right? So you can simply run this and install all the dependency libraries and things like that. Once you do that, you go ahead and configure your API key, right? So this is the base URL that you see, gateway.flotorch.cloud, and you configure your API key, right? So you can click on this prerequisites.ipynb. This will actually give you the link, or let's say the steps of how do you actually create the FloTorch API key, and you can simply go ahead and use that FloTorch API key. And when you put it here, it should simply accept, right? So once this is done, these are all the libraries that we want to load, right? So FloTorch Agent, which is the one which I talked about. You need a session management library that is already, we should be importing that too. Then we have a runner from ADK, and then we have types and function tool to actually wrap everything, right? So all the code that we have, right? So this application that I'm actually going to show you on a high level, what it does is it simply talks to your Google API and answers to the question, right? So it's a very simple agent that we have built, right? So as the name simply suggests, single agent with custom tool, right? So this custom tool is built in this notebook itself, right? So let me walk through that, right? So you can see that this is the tool that is actually there, right? So what we are doing, you need a Google API, because as I said, it is going to do a Google search for you, and you need a API key for that to access the Google API, and you should be able to create it very easily, right? And then you will get a CAC ID as well. You'll use these two from your ID and run this cell, right? So what this cell does, it simply makes connection, or let's say tries to talk to the Google search from the agent that we are actually building, right? So here you can see that the whole function, the Google search function that I have over here, I'm calling that in the function tool, right? So this function tool is basically a class which allows the agent's underlying language model to understand what the tool does and how to call it, right? So this is again coming from your ADK, Google ADK, which is here, right? So we are just wrapping this function around your function, or let's say class around your function, and running it, right? So once you run it, next is something called as you create a session, right? So this session usually runs live, right? So you create a session, and anyway, you had already defined your API key and the FloTorch base URL as well. So this should run without any problem, right? So once it runs, it simply says initialized session, right? And next, you can see that I'm defining my FloTorch agent here, right? So here, basically, I'm initializing my FloTorch agent, right? So this is the core of the application, basically, right? So it is configured in its name, right? So API credential. I'll show you in the FloTorch actual console as well, right? So how this function actually looks like, or let's say how that agent actually looks like, what model it is using, and things like that, right? So, but I want to go through the code as well. That's the reason I'm running you through these notebook, because this is the way we can go ahead and test how our agents are actually working, right? So you can see that this initialization has been done over here. Next is you do this configuration of runner and the chat function, right? So this is something which you run. Basically, you will have your events that are going to run when you have this function done, right? So this is the chat with function, or let's say chat with agent function that we are going to run. And once this is run, you can simply go ahead and have the conversation, right? So you can see that I'm hardly running like 3 or 4 steps actually, right? So apart from setting up my API key, there are only 2 functions which we are running, right? So one function is basically the whole tool itself, right? And another function is basically trying to chat with the agent. These are the only 2 tools, or let's say 2 functions that we are actually running, right? So once these 2 are done, you can simply see that I'm asking like questions, right? So let's say my first question in the first session itself, right? So the session is common over here, right? So in this first session itself, what I'm saying, I'm simply saying, what is the stock price of Apple on October 23rd? Right? So I'm simply passing the session here and I'm printing the response, right? So in the same session, I'm also asking what is the current temperature in, let's say, Austin, Texas, right? So now let's see how the responses are, right? So if you scroll down, you should be able to see that the response is here, right? So it says that on October 23rd, 2025, the stock price for Apple was, let's say, $259.58, right? So that's the answer it is giving, right? So you can go ahead and verify for that date. And next answer, or let's say for the second query, you can simply see that the current temperature in Austin is 68 Fahrenheit, right? So 68 degree Fahrenheit, right? So I had run this code probably an hour ago just to test it. That's the reason it might show the previous an hour ago, whatever the temperature it was, right? So that's how simple it is to go ahead and test an application, right? So now let me do one more thing. I'll just share my screen back, guys, where I can show you the FloTorch console. Just give me a moment. Let me stop share and reshare again. Yeah, so I got the screen. So let me share it again. Yep. Yeah. Just a moment. Alishpa, can you, okay, I think my screen share is paused. Let me stop share again and try. Just give me a moment. I'll share screen again. Okay. So this should solve the problem. Okay. So now, yeah. Do you see the screen for FloTouch? Alishba, can you confirm, please?
Yeah, it's working fine.
Awesome. Right. Yeah. So here you can see, right? So this is how your FloTorch dashboard actually looks, right? So what I have done is I've just created a workspace over here, which is called as Data Science Dojo. And I have built the applications here and then trying to call those applications through the code, right? So you can see there is something called as agents over here, right? So if you click on this and then there is something called as agent builder, right? And then when I click on this agent builder, you can see there are multiple agents that I have built for this demo. The one which we are using here is single agent with local tool, right? So now when I click on this, you can see that I can go ahead and select the model that I want to, right? So I'm just simply saying, click on this and I have a list of models that I can actually go ahead and use. For now, what I'm doing is I'm simply selecting Gemini Flash 2.5 or let's say Gemini Flash 2.5 as my model. So this is my LLM that I'm using. And you can see that I can actually configure the agent details also, right? So when I click on this, you can see that there is a system prompt and there is an agent goal, right? So for now, just to keep this simple, I'm writing both of them same, but based on the complexity of the agent that you're actually building, you can have a complex goal, the steps that you want to have, all of those things here, right? So we'll talk about that also when I get into the RAG agent, right? So this is where I can go ahead and configure. And then I'm not using any tool over here, right? So this is not an MCP tool that it's basically a local tool that I'm using. So I'm not configuring here anything, right? So that's how easy it is, right? So now you can see that again, I'm going back to agent builder, and this is the single agent with local tool that I'm using. Now let me go back to the screen of code. Yeah. So yeah, so if you scroll down over here, I'm using the same agent name which I was using in the console screen, right? So single agent with local 2, right? So you simply set up your agent there on that no code platform, use it to test it, right? So that is how simple it is, where you can go ahead and simply set up your tool or let's say your agent and start using it, right? So one more thing that I also wanted to show was on the log side, right? So you have something called as logs over here. And you can see that the multiple calls that I'm doing, right? So it's basically Gemini Flash. I was testing before this session. So all the calls that I have done was on Gemini Flash. You can see that am I using any type of cache? No. What is the prompt tokens that I had sent? What is the completion tokens total? What is the cost? What is the latency, overheads, and things like that, right? So all of these details can be found over here. So this is how your simple agent with local tool actually works, right? So now let me move on to the next notebook that I wanted to talk about, which is basically this agentic RAG, right? So let me go back to the starting point, right? So here you can see that this is a little bit more complex than the previous one. It was the earlier one was very, very simple agent that we have built, right? So in this whole part, right? So or let's say in this whole section, what we are trying to do is we are making use of a RAG architecture, but wrapping that around the agent so that the agent has the flexibility to do multiple calls or let's say take multiple decisions, right? So if I go ahead and use a traditional RAG architecture, what happens is most of the things are kind of hard coded, right? So this is the chunk size that I'm taking in. Let's say this is the vector database where the data is. I'm simply going to use that and things like that, right? So I'm not having much control over, right? So but when I define an agent and put all of those functions to the agent and define the steps, agent will start doing that optimization for me to get the right answer, right? So that's the idea behind it. And the vector database that we are using here is FAISS, basically Facebook AI search that we are using, right? So you can use your Chrome DB or any other vector DB that you want to go ahead and use, right? So again, setup part is again simple. You simply do a pip install of FloTorch ADK, and then you move to the required libraries. As I'm using the PDF files, I want a library to open the PDF files. So that's the reason I'm using PyPDF2 over here, and then sentence transformer for your embedding models, and then the vector database, right, and NumPy and requests and things like that, right? So again, this part remains same, and the only change that you can see is I'm changing the agent name, right? So here it is a RAG agent, right? So now you can go back to that screen, which is this one, and go to the agent builder part, and you can see that RAG agent is already something which I have built, right? So let me go back to this again, and now you can see that on your function calling, or let's say the libraries that I'm calling, right? So FloTorch ADK agent, memory service, session, and things like that. And again, I'm using the same function, right? So which is again coming from google.adk, right? So you can use other tools if you want to, right? So now what are the functions that I'm using? So there are a few functions that I'm using. Let me go through that. Here you can see that there is an extraction function, and then I want to do and go ahead and do the split into text, right? So and then I'm using create index for my vector database, right? And a search function I'm using, right? So these are all the functions that I'm using, and then wrapping all of these functions in this get context loop, right? So now here you can see that all of these functions which I had built earlier have been wrapped around here, right? So you can see that split function, opening function, and then index creation and writing it to the index, all of that has been done, right? So, and at the end, I'm calling my function tools, just like we did earlier. And then I'm calling my function, which is get context local, right? So this is the main function that I'm actually calling in the function tool. Once I do that, you simply go ahead and again initialize your session, right? And then again initialize your FloTorch agent, right? And then configure your agent runner and chat function, right? So again, the same thing will come. You can see that I'm calling it from a PDF. That's the reason you can see a little bit of change in the function over here. And then I simply go ahead and call my agent, right? So here you can see the session I have defined, and then I'm saying chat with agent, and this is the file I'm actually trying to interact with, right? So this is an open file. You can simply go ahead and copy paste. It's a PDF file, which is kind of an invoice, right? So it's kind of an invoice where you have multiple fields inside it. I'm simply calling that PDF file and trying to chat with that, right? So trying to understand what that file is about and things like that, right? So you can see the first question that I'm using is, can you provide the overview of the PDF, right? So, and also I'm asking what is the PDF mainly described about, right? So you can have that chat history that you want to, right? So you can see here below, it simply says that you can see that recipient, or let's say recipient, this is Denny Ganavan. Basically, it's all there in that PDF file, right? So what is the invoice number? These are all the details that I had asked, right? So this is the overview. And then the document also contains some placeholder text in Latin and things like that. It's giving you more details about that. Now, in the same session, what I'm trying to do is I'm asking one more question as well, right? So you can see what is the PDF actually described about. You can see that it gives you similar details, basically kind of a repeated thing that we have done earlier, but you can have that session continued. That's what I wanted to show you here, right? So this is on the second application, right? So which is this agentic RAG application, right? So now again, if I go back to my FloTorch console, which is here, now what I have to do, simply go to agent builder, right? So this is the dashboard again, just to make sure that everybody understand, I'm just showing the dashboard again, right? So when you sign up, you should be able to see some sort of screen like this, right? And then you have all the things. If you have already interacted with some sort of LLMs already, you will see the traffic in the dashboard, right? And then you go to, let's say, agents, and inside that agent builder, you will see that agent RAG agent that which I have already built, right? So let's say the question usually people ask is, now if I have to create my own agent, how would I create, right? So it's simple. Again, you simply go to FloTorch agent, give the name of the agent and give the description, and then say create. You should be able to see one more line item over here, right? And then when you click on that, you will be able to see this screen where you want to configure what model you want to use, right? What is the agent details, like what is the system prompt, what is the goal of that, and all of these things, right? So again, it's as simple as that. Here, when I click, now you can see that earlier I was using Gemini 2.5, right? So now I'm using GPT-4o, which is coming from your OpenAI models, right? So this is the model that I'm using. And then I have the agent details, right? So now you can see that I'm adding complexity, right? So earlier it was just a Google search that I was actually trying to do. But now you can see that I'm adding a little bit more complexity. Again, it's not that complex where I can have system prompt different and agent goal different. So that's the reason you can see both of them are same, right? So your helpful assistant that can answer questions on local PDF content and things like that, right? So it is telling you what are the steps that you want to do, and it is following exactly those steps in our demo, right? So this is the second application that I wanted you to look into, right? So again, I'm going back over here, guys, just to make sure that everybody is signing up, or let's say know how to look for those repos, right? So you go into the FloTorch official website, you simply click on GitHub, right? So when you click on this GitHub, you will see this resources part, right? In this, when you get into, let's say, FloTorch, this is the resources part, right? And then you have examples. In this examples, you have FloTorch agent examples, right? So, and then these are the three notebooks that we are actually looking into, right? So that is how you can browse towards these notebooks and simply start using them, right? Yeah, so let's move on to the third application as well, which is single agent with MCP, right? So now this is a little bit different, right? So I'm not building any local tool for me. I'm simply saying that I want to use a MCP for this, right? So some MCP server, which is open source, let's say I'm going to use that and make sure that it works for us, right? So what is that I'm trying to do over here is basically I'm trying to get some information on crypto, right? So that's the application about, right? Initial setup, again, it remains same, that this is the third time that we are repeating, right? So it's kind of somewhere you can simply go ahead and have that defined for you and simply run these things, right? So you can see pip install FloTorch ADK. This is something which we are running, and API key, you know how to create. Now, the only difference that you can see here is I am using something called as crypto agent, right? So if I go back, oops, yeah. So if I go back to my agent builder, here you can see that there is crypto agent, right? So when I click on this, you will again see these things. Now, the model that I'm using is GPT-4o, right? So if you can click and change if you want to and make that latest, and you will be able to see the model is changed. And then you have agent details, right? So here you can see that I'm writing something, right? So you can see that system prompt, right? So I'm saying that you are a helpful assistant equipped with specialized tools, right? So that's the tool that I'm actually giving is CoinGecko. So this is an open source tool that is available for your crypto related information or crypto related data. I will be walking you through that link as well, so that you can use other tools if you want to, right? And then agent goal is something different that I have done, right? So provide precise and informative responses to user by leveraging this tool, CoinGecko, wherever relevant, right? So if query cannot be answered using this tool, respond politely and clearly, right? So this is how you handle the responses as well, right? So yeah, so this is the configuration part. Now you can see that I am adding one more element to this, or let's say one more component to this, which is your tools part, right? So when you click on this, you can see that there are few tools that are available. I can simply go ahead and use it. Or if I want to add a tool, I can go ahead and add a tool as well, right? So now from where did I get this, right? So you can simply go back here and see this, right? So mcpservers.org, right? So anything which is open over here, you can simply go ahead and use, right? So I have used something called as CoinGecko, which is this one, right? So if you click on this, right? So if you click on this, you will see that either if I want to go ahead and use HTTP streaming, I should be able to use it, or SSE endpoint, I should be able to use it, right? So any of these two things, you should be able to use it. FloTorch actually supports both, right? So again, I'll go back to this code. Now here, what I'm trying to do, so necessary libraries you're actually calling in, and then FloTorch client, right? So you're creating your agent, or let's say initializing your agent, and then the runner part, right? And then you have the helper functions, right? So you can see the same thing which I wanted to call, I'm having over here, right? So your content, event, and then how do you want to chat with, right? So it's a single run singleton. Basically, that's the function that I'm actually calling in, which is this function, right? And then I can go ahead and simply start chatting, right? So you can see here the same runner session I'm calling in, and the chat agent function that I'm calling in, and then I'm passing in the question that I want to go ahead with, right? So I'm simply saying what is the current price of Bitcoin, right? So you should be able to see the response somewhere over here, right? So it says 11306 $0.76, right? So it's somewhere around 113K. It's saying that that's the price of the Bitcoin now, right? So that's how you should be able to use your MCP tool also, right? So if I get into this, just for you to know, right? So there is one more option that I want you to look into is, let's say I'll just close this part and then go to workflows, right? So this workflow part will be covered by my colleague Brijesh in much more detail. I'm just giving you a high level, let's say, peek into this, but Brijesh will cover this in the next session in much more depth, right? So we will see that, okay, which is the tool or which is the agent that we have? We have crypto agent, right? So this is how we make connection, right? So there is the start. I can go ahead and type in my question and then get the responses. This is the crypto agent where I have used, right? So this is the name that I'm giving in. What is the let's say LLM that I'm using, which is this, right? And then also I'm giving in what tool that I want to use, right? So if I get into this tool, you can simply see that this is the CoinGecko part, which we have using, and this is named as MCP over here, right? So let me close this. And then if you want to add more, let's say, you can go ahead and add them too, right? So that is how you can go ahead and use this FloTorch at your convenience, right? So yeah, so let me go back to this. Yeah, so these are the responses which I showed earlier, and you should be able to see them as well when you go ahead and use this code, right? So let me go back to the PPT. Yeah, so as I was saying, guys, you should be able to use this um, uh, uh, QR code to go ahead and register yourself. As I said, it's free for all you to go ahead and sign up, and you should be start to use it because you have 1 billion tokens free on the enterprise part, right? So all the features are free. The gateway part is giving you 100k gateway requests, right? So full access to all the features, right? So we are not restricting ourselves in this free edition. You will be able to see all the features, right? And then you should be able to scan this also for getting free tokens, right? So on the LLMs that you want to use, right? So this is coming from AWS, I think. So you should be simply able to kind of scan this QR as well and go ahead and start using the LLMs also, right? So a lot of popular LLMs are there which are free for you to use up to a certain limit, right? So that's about this. And yeah, so that is what I wanted to cover, guys, in this session. I think we are good at time as well, so we are 5 minutes early. So let me stop sharing my screen. Yeah, so yeah, guys, thanks a lot for your patience and all the questions. I see there are like 71 chat messages, and I see 100 plus participants who are there. Very pleased to see all of these things. Oh, you want to see the QR code again? Let me share it. But again, we will be sharing this document or PPT, guys. So don't worry about not having it, but this is the PPT that you should be seeing.